All right, guys, it's me and then beer. So, I know where I stand, and I know where I stand in the way of everybody else in the room. So I'll try to go through this. I'll go through this. We'll see how long it takes, and hopefully it's worthwhile. So this is what I'll be covering. I'll go through a little introduction. I'll talk about importance of desktop browser testing. Hopefully everybody in the room understands that by now after listening to today and because of why you're here. We'll talk a little about moving to mobile testing, both mobile web and native app. Talk about some considerations, and I'll go through an example, and then I'll wrap things up. So who am I? As Manny mentioned, my name is Dan Rabinovitz. I live about 3,000 miles from here, over in Connecticut. Been with SAWS since July. Prior to that, I've worked for some big companies, some small companies, so CA, Rally, Pega, IBM, well-known companies in the industry. I spend a lot of time there in New York City working with all of these types of customers. So what I've learned is my time as an SE working in all these, I've been an SE at these 4 companies, or now 5 companies. I've learned that I'm the jack of all trades, master of none. But I've also learned that helping these companies, I've gotten really good at listening and understanding their problems and helping them solve them. And I know if I don't have the answer, I probably know someone else who can help them out. So my talk today, I'm going to go through things. You might see me taking some shortcuts in here, but understand that that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'm happy to work with any one of you one-on-one later over a beer. So assumptions, one assumption. Everybody here is familiar with Selenium, and if you're at SauceCon, you better be familiar with Selenium. So what are we talking about? When we talk about desktop testing, everybody's got a website. It's got to work. This is Google. Pretty straightforward. You go to Google, you search for something. Everybody uses Selenium. It's pretty much a standard. We heard Simon this morning. He talked all about the history of Selenium and WebDriver and where that came from. But now everything's moving to digital. You're moving to native apps. You're moving to tablets. You're moving to Androids, to iPhones. People have responsive websites that have to work. They have native apps that have to work. You have to be able to test all that and make sure that everything works properly. Why? It's pretty simple. So there are 3 things up here. So 1, speed to market. You want to be able to release faster, and that talks to kind of continuous integration, continuous delivery that I'm sure there have been other sessions about today and will be about tomorrow as well. Customers want to have a much better experience. So I don't know about everybody in the room, but if a website doesn't work or an app doesn't work, I'm going to go somewhere else pretty quickly. And lastly, the most important part to consider for this talk is this is from 2017. More than 50% of the world's internet traffic is coming from mobile devices. So if you don't have a mobile website that works or a mobile app that works, you're missing out, especially if you're in a B2C type of environment. And even in a B2B environment, things have to work. What are some things to think about? So as you move from a web test on Selenium to a native app or to a mobile web, what are you going to test on? Is it going to be a native app? Are you going to test on responsive web? Is it going to be a hybrid app? So hybrid apps are those apps that kind of give you a native app wrapper around a website, and those are pretty prevalent as well. Capabilities. So in the real device world, your phone has things like a GPS. Sometimes it has altimeters. They have cameras. You're going to take advantage of those capabilities in either your mobile website or in your native app. Locator strategy. This is what I'll be spending quite a bit of time on as I go through the rest of my presentation. How the heck do you figure out what those locators are? In a desktop web setting, you can use Chrome. It gets a little more tricky in mobile web, and it's trickier still when you start to look at native apps. Test language. So this isn't the framework language. It's not, am I going to write my test in Java, or am I going to use TestNG, or am I going to use Protractor, or whatever framework is out there, a custom framework. But it's more along the lines of when you write your test, you're going to leverage Appium for cross-platform compatibility and reusability, or you're going to go the Espresso and XCUI test route. So those are also they're things to think about. Espresso obviously is native for Android. XCUI is native on iOS. There are pluses and minuses here for all of them. What I'll be going through today is, in my discussion, we'll be going through Appium. Native and web view contexts. So when you start to look at a mobile app, you can switch between device capabilities and device pop-ups and dialogues and interactions as well as the web. And this is from a hybrid app standpoint, if you're embedding web components in, on a mobile device, you have the ability to do that. On Selenium, you can do that a little bit. You can handle browser pop-ups and things like that, but you don't have quite the same level of capability. Execution location. So I've heard a couple of sessions today, and I've heard people talking about writing tests on, they run on emulators, and they may or may not work the same way on a real device, or emulators and simulators, they may or may not work the same way on a real device. I would argue that if you write a pretty good test, that it should work on both. There may be some differences. I heard a presentation earlier by a gentleman from GameSys, and they were looking at frame rates and things like that as a part of their test. Obviously, there are going to be differences, because in emulators and simulators, you don't have that GPU to drive those frame rates. But if you're looking at a functional test from a web perspective, it should work, whether you're running it on an emulator, simulator, or on a real device. All right, before I dive in and show you a test, we're going to take a little, I'll tell you a little story here. And I know before Manny was asking me if he had find dirt on me to introduce me. So I'll give you a little bit of background here, uncover a little bit. So I got a 5-year-old son. He loves and plays ice hockey. So I live at the hockey rink every weekend. And as you can imagine, hockey, expensive sport, got to buy him pads, got to buy him all the equipment, spend a lot of time there for ice time and things like that. And like any good hockey player, he's got a favorite team. And it happens to be the Boston Bruins. So being in Connecticut, all right. There we go. He insists he's going to be a Boston Bruins player when he grows up, and I'm all for that. So like any good kid, though, he outgrows clothes, wants a new jersey. Says, Mom, Dad, I need a new jersey, need some new gear. Where are we going to go? I go here first, or I go here to their website or to their native apps. And well, why Kohl's? Why not go to like the Boston Bruins shop or something like that? Well, this is why. I get bombarded with email coupons. I can use my Kohl's charge. I get the stuff in my mailbox, lots of different things, right? So that kind of sets up the scenario of, all right, well, I'm a consumer and I'm going to go to Kohl's and look for that hockey jersey for my son. How does Kohl's have confidence that their website is going to work and they can monetize my visit? So we'll start with just a very simple flow. This isn't the best example, but it works well for this scenario where it's basically I'm going to go to the Kohl's website and I'm going to search for something, search for a jersey. I'm going to add it to my shopping cart, and I'm going to make sure that that discount is applied. And this is the scenario that I'll be working through for a good chunk of this presentation. Show you how this works on a website, on a mobile web, and on a native app, the same flow. And it's pretty easy to put this together, but it's a good example. I didn't hit checkout for this flow when I was writing this test because I only have one coupon code here that I was checking for, so I don't want to use that over and over again when I'm writing this. But we'll get to the point where this is in the basket and I can verify that everything worked properly. So let's go ahead and create a test on the Kohl's website. So this is just the Chrome browser desktop test. Everybody in the room is probably familiar with this. You can click on an element. You can use the Chrome inspector. You can find that element ID. In this case, it's conveniently called search. I can put that into my test. I can send information to that box. I can send keys. I can execute that search. If we skip ahead a little bit, I've already added something to my cart. So we can see here on the shopping cart, there's one item up here. I added that. Not really going to be a good, there we go. No ID on that shopping cart button, so maybe I have to use XPath to get that information out. Lots of different ways to get that. Chrome makes it easy for XPath. I know there are pluses and minuses of XPath. In this case, I use that because it's pretty simple to write that, to click and copy that. And you do that, and you wind up with a test that kind of looks like this, where you go and create a remote web driver in this case, set up some weights, go through, I open up a page. This is just standard Selenium test. I'm clicking, I'm sending a search, I'm sending return, I'm adding it to my bag, and I get down here and I'm applying that promo code, and then I'm verifying that that actually worked. So this is the code that I put together. You can run this anywhere. I ran this on Sauce because it was convenient for me to do so, but it'll execute anywhere, provided you have the right constructors for the driver and things like that. But from a test standpoint, this is the base Selenium test that I'll be working with. Mobile web. So all right, we have our test. We've executed this on the desktop. We've verified that as the dad of a 5-year-old, I can go and buy something and get a discount. Well, Google makes this pretty easy to go to the mobile web. So this came up yesterday in one of the sessions that I went to during the workshop. Talked a little bit about device mode. So device mode that was added about a month ago. It's important to note this is helpful for mobile webs only. It's not going to help you for native apps too much, but it's super useful for mobile web testing, responsive web, or testing on devices. So what we're looking at here, this is still a Chrome browser. It's still on my desktop, still on a Mac, but I hit that little button down in the corner, and that little button gives me this little drop down at the top where I can select devices. Maybe, there we go. So out of the box, I have these devices. This is just what came in Chrome, the Kindle, there's an iPhone, a couple iPhones, iPhone X, iPhone 10, iPad Pro, however you want your website to look, or you can choose responsive, and it'll resize as you resize the Chrome window. Now I have my mobile website. I can do a similar thing that I just did for my desktop test, where I can go and I can find those IDs. In this case, the ID changed. So now it's this mcom-search input as opposed to just search. And I can do the same thing. So now another element, I'm going to go through my checkout, and this part of the process. So I've skipped a few steps here, skipping around. I can copy the XPath. If there are other locators, I can do that as well. But I have all this information, and I haven't opened this up on an emulator. I haven't opened this up on a simulator. I haven't opened this up on a real device. This is all available to me from my regular Chrome browser. Same type of thing, there's the XPath that's available. Now, as I go and I complete this test script, same type of process that you're familiar with Selenium, figure out what the elements are, put them in there. You can use XPath. The test creation is similar. Again, there's no need for emulators and simulators to create this test. To run this test, you can run it, I was running it on an emulator and when I ran this, so you need an execution location, but to create the test, you don't have to worry about doing that. And this is easy. This is very, very easy to do. So the last point on here, talking about iOS driver and Android driver, this is touching, hit the back button. This is touching a little bit on capabilities that are available in Appium. So when you create this test, the test that I've created here will test and execute a similar test. It's not taking advantage of any device capabilities. So that would be things like geolocation or any pop-ups that might happen in the browser. We're kind of ignoring all that to create this test script. And I like doing this, and I like advising other customers that I work with to do this because it at least gives you a starting point for testing your mobile website instead of going crazy and trying to exercise every single capability that you can. If you wanted to exercise device capabilities, you would change that driver type from a remote web driver or a web driver to an iOS driver or Android driver, which are constructs from Appium. So those are extensions of the WebDriver object. So this test script that executes on a mobile web, it looks remarkably similar. So went and created a WebDriver, some timeouts. I did my search. I did the size selection, much like I did before. I go to the checkout. I execute the checkout, and I get all the way down to the bottom, and I do the verification, much like I did before. So this is pretty straightforward. At least it should be pretty straightforward, and this will run on a mobile website. Again, it's easy. This is low-hanging fruit, guys. So for those people who don't really test much on their mobile website, this is all very, very straightforward. And for those of you looking to actually use discount codes, that's not going to work. So don't take a picture of that and try to use my discount code. I made sure to blur that out. All right, so that's mobile web, leveraging capabilities that are available in Chrome on a desktop. So then we get to this. We get to our native app. And in this case, I wrote this test, and I was executing this on an Android phone using the Coles native app on Android. Same thing with iOS. If you want to do this for iOS, the examples I'll show you, all the screenshots, everything is in Android, but the concepts are the same. So Appium, for those of you who haven't been to any earlier sessions or don't have a familiarity with it, it's basically Selenium for mobile apps. So it's an extension of Selenium. It allows you to automate interactions with native mobile apps and take advantage of device capabilities. This little bottom part here, I copied this right from the Appium webpage, appium.io. So it's another open source framework that allows you to automate app interactions. And it's important to note that it does use the WebDriver protocol. So for those of you who are newer to Appium, and I know a lot of the people that I talk to out in the field, they're newer to Appium. If you can write a Selenium test, you can write an Appium test. The constructs are very, very similar. A couple different ways. When we start talking about native app selectors, well, I can't go to an emulator and do inspect, and you might be able to, and on a real device, if you have plugged in via USB cable. I tend to use Appium Desktop. So Appium Desktop, this is a free download. It's created by the people that created Appium. You can go download it. This will start up an Appium server locally on your machine. So that's useful. If you have a local Appium server, you can run this against a local emulator, a local simulator if you want to. Or you can run it remotely against a cloud offering like Sauce or another, or you can run emulator and simulator on Sauce as well if you wanted to use that. So it starts up the server. What I'm going to be talking about today, the most useful tool that I find anyway for helping to find locators is the inspector view. Connecting to apps, it's much like you would connect to a desktop browser or connect to a real device using Appium if you had an Appium test. You have to pass in desired capabilities. In this case, this is utilizing the Sauce remote desktop cloud, or real device cloud, I'm sorry, RDC, real device cloud. That's what's on this screen. If I've also used this with this automatic server, you can pass in device desired capabilities and just connect to a local emulator. So there's lots and lots of flexibility with this tool. What do you get? Well, you get something that looks like this once you connect. So once you figure out the mechanics of connecting, you pass in the correct desired capabilities, you get this view. So on the left-hand pane, I get an image of what my native app looks like. And this is the native app as it's running on the device or the emulator or simulator. I get a view of the source. So these are all of the potential locators. It's everything that's driving that page. And this is brought back over using the JSON protocol. We're inspecting the app view and bringing it back. And on the right-hand side, I get information about a selected element. So in this case, I clicked on the search box, and where I am in the source is highlighted. And on the right-hand side, I have information about that element. So now I can take that, and I can copy that ID and use that ID to go and send keys, to go and hit return, to go and execute searches, to go and interact with this however I want. I have both the ID and the XPath. So much like in Selenium, the ID is preferred. But if I don't have an ID or an accessibility ID, I can take that XPath and I can copy and paste that as well. I can interact with this as well. So if I select that search box, now I can tap on that, much like I'm tapping on it on the phone. I can do a send keys. So this is much like in Selenium, where you would send keys with your driver.send keys. I can send keys to this particular app, or I can clear a text box as well. I can also do native app actions or device actions. So I can swipe and tap. So if I want to test scrolling, if I want to test tapping on a specific coordinate on the screen, I can do that as well. Another useful feature, oh, my arrow's in the wrong spot. No, it's close. It should be over a little bit. That circle right in the middle, there's a recorder feature. So for those of you, several years ago, back when the Selenium IDE was supported in Firefox, you could load that up, you could take actions, you could record, you'd have a Selenium test that it helped you out, mostly worked, right? You'd have to massage it a little bit. This does a very similar thing for these elements in a native app. So if I wanted to click on that search box, this is what I get. I ran the inspector view. I can choose a language and a framework, in this case, JUnit in Java. And I get all the code that I need to execute a tap on that search box. So now I can take this and I can copy and paste it into my test. We start to put all this together, and you end up with a test that kind of looks like this. So this is the same test that we saw before, or well, mostly the same test. I had to cut it off at the bottom just for real estate purposes. But what you can start to do here is you can start to take advantage of device capabilities. So if we take a look at this, I can set the location. So for a brick and mortar store like Kohl's or any other consumer goods store, I can figure out where I am. So now I can search for items in a store. I know I do that when I go shopping. I use the Target app all the time. I use Kohl's app to search for items in stores. That happens to be the latitude and longitude and elevation of my hometown in Connecticut. When you do that, this allows location access. So what this is doing, when you pull up a website or a native app on your phone that requires location, you got to handle that pop-up somehow that says, yes, I want this website or app to be able to access my location from the device. So I'm handling that. And again, I found this element. So this is a native Android. It's an Android element. It's not part of the Kohl's app. It's native to Android, and I have to be able to click and say, yes, I want to allow that. In the app, this is what an app ID looks like. So this is just an end user agreement. When you run the app, you have to say, yes, I agree to, in this case, it's Kohl's, getting all the information about me and tracking me and everything like that, and I allow you to use the data for whatever it is you're allowed to use the data for. But the ID is pretty straightforward. It's basically, in this case, it's the package and the ID accept. And I found that using Appium Desktop. And then we get into more of the kind of mundane things here where I'm clicking on items and I'm searching. Down here, we can see things like tapping. So another Appium construct is this touch action. In this case, I'm using touch action to tap on a search button that didn't have an easily available ID, but I can do that. It's like tapping on a little button to search. And this would go on. This would, much like a test, much like a Selenium test, the test that we saw before, it would go on and you'd be able to see the rest of this test, and I'd do a verification. I'd enter in that discount code, check to make sure that it works so Kohl's can monetize that. So we start talking about this and kind of to take you through what I've talked about. So mobile testing, it's critical. And what we saw before, that more than 50% of your traffic is coming from the website, that's not me, that's a Gartner survey. So it's not me just up here, it's not some random analyst, it's Gartner. They're saying more and more traffic is coming from mobile devices. And why wouldn't it? Our phones these days are basically a computer with a phone app on it. That's basically what it amounts to. Everything is going to be going through that handheld computer, more or less. I mentioned that Chrome device mode. Creating that, it's really low-hanging fruit to create a test against a mobile website because of what Google has done in their browser. They've made it much, much easier. Before, you could resize a website and go and inspect, and you might get the right thing depending on how much you zoomed in. But it's like low-hanging fruit now to create that test. Native app testing, what I took you through with Appium Desktop today, it's a similar concept. You're finding IDs, you're finding XPath. The tools are different, though. So in this case, it's Appium Desktop. To find that, it's free. If you're using XCUI Test or Espresso, probably have to talk to your developers to get the right IDs or to write those tests. But with Appium, it's pretty good because it's based on Selenium. If your tests are written well, your desktop test or your web test, you can leverage that across platforms depending on whether or not depending if the IDs change. So interestingly, I wrote this presentation and I wrote these tests before, and I was using the Google website. And I quickly realized what Google has done on their website, if you go look at it, they have all the same IDs between whether you're on a mobile website or their desktop website. So I put together this presentation and I was thinking to myself, wow, this is going to be really boring to talk about if all the IDs are the same. But you could also argue that that's good if you do that, because then you won't have to go back and rewrite your test and find those IDs again. And the last point on here, what you should take away from this conference, talk to the people that are here from SOS. We have a lot of expertise in this, across Selenium, across Appium. There's a lot of expertise here, so please use the rest of tonight at the bowling alley and use tomorrow to talk to some of your colleagues who are already doing this and talk to the SOS people that are here as well. We're here to help you out. So a couple sessions I wanted to highlight for tomorrow. There's a good session in the morning given by Jonathan Lips, who's one of the founders of, one of the co-creators of Appium. And there's also a session that Craig is doing from Vanguard, talking about testing across platform from a single test suite. So those are both in the morning. So before I wrap things up, right, we got to go back to my kid here, right? So back to the original story. Kohl's, if they execute these tests, they have the confidence that they can sell to their customers, and that their customers are going to have the same experience, whether they access their website on a browser, on a mobile web, or on a native app. And that's good for them because they get my money. And to wrap things up, if everything works, I wind up with a super happy kid. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, we have a few more minutes. And if not, then everybody can go to the bar. Question? We have a mic coming over here.
Hello.
Hi.
Can you open the slide, putting it all together?
This one? This one. Yep.
Yes, that one. So here you have an ID, somewhere in the middle ID accept.
Yep.
And you are using full path name. What is the reason behind using that full path name?
Like the com.kohls.mcommerce, that?
Yeah, instead you can just use ID accept.
Because that's what Appium Desktop told me to use.
Okay.
Seriously, when I was doing this, right? You're probably right. I might be able to use id.accept. But I leveraged the capabilities in Appium Desktop to get that, so I wouldn't have to guess.
Okay.
That's why.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So my framework is using water and Cucumber.
Okay.
Now, if I configure my page objects correctly so that it knows when it's testing a desktop versus mobile application, I should be able to use exactly the same test and run it, right?
Yep, you should be able to. And that's what happened when I looked at Google's webpage. When I looked at Google's webpage, all the IDs were exactly the same across mobile web, across a responsive UI and a desktop website. So in that case, I could take my test that was written for Google on the desktop and run it on an emulator or simulator, or even on a real device in a mobile browser, and it should work.
Okay, and that's how I should implement this, right?
You can, right? So in the example with Kohl's here, they didn't do that. Some websites do, some websites don't. It just depends on how your page object model is
The IDs
constructed.
are the same, I checked.
If you use the same, then yeah, then it should work just fine. It worked fine anyway when I did it on Google's website, so.
I found in learning about Appium, just over the last couple of days, that finding these IDs is really problematic. I mean, getting your Appium server up, connecting, bringing up that simulator is just really tedious. Do you see any accelerators or breakthroughs on that?
Have you used the Appium desktop?
Yes, that's what we're using,
Yeah, so I'd be interested to talk to you more about that, because I was able to get Appium Desktop. It took me longer to set up an emulator locally than it did to connect from Appium Desktop and actually get all the IDs. So, and we're continually evolving. As if you went to Stuart's talk this morning, he talked about how we're in the process of solving mobile testing. We're solving that problem of mobile testing, and we're getting there with Appium. So Appium is not as mature as Selenium. Some of the tools like Appium Desktop, they're not as mature. But if you look at how frequently the Appium team is releasing updates to both Appium, the Appium project, and Appium Desktop, we're getting there pretty fast. So give it a week or two. Oh, hold on a second.
Appium has a recorder button.
Yes.
So the location code, the lines that you have written, would it be able to record that, the pop-up?
So that recorder the recorder feature, and if I go back here, you talking about this in Appium Desktop, this recorder
Yeah,
feature?
no, the location pop-up, it will say, should you allow your
Yes.
app to use location
Yep.
allow, or
Yep.
would it be able to find that if I use recorder? Like, would it be
On
able to
this?
write
Yes.
the code?
Yep, it would. So
Oh.
so everything that you saw here, to find all these IDs, and in the rest of my test, I use that recorder feature, or I clicked on it and I just copy and pasted the ID from Appium Desktop.
Okay.
So that's where I got this from, because I didn't know what the locator was for that. Use my location was. Appium Desktop was able to pick that up.
Okay, because some of the buttons, Appium wasn't able to, it wasn't allowing me to click on it. When I click on record,
Okay.
it would say that the interaction is not available.
I got that a couple times too. I just
Yeah.
tried again until
Okay.
it worked. So
Yeah, all right.
when in doubt, keep pushing the button. But that, it speaks to the maturity of the Appium project, right? So that will get better over time.
Hi.
Hi.
Sometimes when I write my code to click on a hamburger menu and go and click on a menu in the hamburger button, and it clicks on the wrong menu actually.
In Appium, you mean? Or
Yeah, in Appium.
So I've seen that as well.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of trial and error. So you're talking about like something like this happens when, even though this is a search box, it's kind of a little bit offset, right?
Yeah.
And it happens with menu items as well. I found that with the tap action as well. That tap action, when I created that, it was actually a point that was like right down there, even though I'm clicking this little search button. So I like to use the hover over a lot in Appium Desktop.
Okay.
So I can't show you right now because this is a slide, but
Okay.
as you've probably seen this, as you move your mouse up and down through this page, this little purple box will change and it will highlight. And when you get close to it, even if you're not sure it's 100% right, I take this ID and I try it out. And if I'm running this locally, it's really fast to run a local emulator to see if that works. So little bit of trial and error on that.
Yeah, because sometimes my tests fail because it's clicking on the wrong button and it is looking for a wrong feature on the page, in the wrong page actually.
Yep.
So it's actually not reliable for me as of now. So that's why I thought if you have a different solution.
Talk to Jonathan Lips tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Thanks,
thank you
Dan.
very much, everyone.